Prologue. They say that a person's earliest memories form around the age of 2. For me, I was 3 years old. Things prior come back to me in bits and pieces, but are mostly feelings of happiness and love. My most concrete memory in those fragile first years was the talk with Aunt Cora and Uncle Roman. I was sitting on my small captain's twin bed, surrounded by my menagerie of stuffies. Ellie, Dog, Bunny, Bobo, and half a dozen others there in place, but lacking a name. Out in the hallway, I could hear Uncle Roman and Aunt Cora talking, and knew that something was wrong. Aunt Cora was the epitome of calm, and had an amazing way of making everyone feel comfortable and secure. However, as I listened, I could sense the tears in her tone as she discussed the recent phone call with Uncle Roman. I slid off my bed and instinctively took Bunny. He was a well-loved white rabbit my mother had given to me when I was 6 months old. Bunny was my most trusted confidant, with a faded blue ribbon around his neck and a crooked ear from my insatiable habit of rubbing it on my nose when fatigue or fear was near. Moving closer to the door, I could feel the soft plush of the baby blue rug squishing between my toes. As I inched my way closer, I could see them through the small opening in my large wooden door. Although I don't remember the full content of the conversation, the tears in Aunt Cora's eyes and the concerned look on my Uncle Roman's face as he held her close have stuck with me all these years. This was the pivotal night of my life. This was the night that both my parents died, and I became an orphan. Chapter 1. Williston. 12 years later. Being on the East Coast will be a pleasant change, don't you think? Uncle Roman asked as he looked over his shoulder at me in the back seat. Turning, I gave an attempt at a smile before shifting back to resume my scenery watching. There was an uncomfortable silence as Uncle Roman and Aunt Cora exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were likely trying to think of something to make this move easier than the last ones. In the past 9 months, we've moved 3 times, and I wondered how long we would last at this house. The realtor says the complex we're moving into is a real up-and-coming area, although most of it is still being built, Aunt Cora added. She also said that there are kids your age on our street, Uncle Roman said. Not wanting to hear how amazing this new house was going to be, I lifted my AirPods and drowned out the world to Imagine Dragons. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my uncle peer back, before dropping his head and turning back to the road. A few hours later, the feeling of the car shift as it veered off the highway caused me to glance up. I watched as the moving van in front of us followed the exit ramp to the bottom, and then turned left onto a minor road. I pulled my AirPods out and sat up in the seats as I looked around. Surrounding the overpass were a few small stores, restaurants, and hotels, on what was otherwise a nondescript area. Williston, 14 miles, Aunt Cora cheered. Acknowledging the same sign she saw, I was more horrified by the sight beyond it. Fields, and fields, and fields of nothing. Nothing except the occasional cow. My heart sank as I waited to see civilization appear. Uncle Roman must have seen the despair cross my face. I know this differs from Scottsdale, but I think you'll like it. Although we'd only been there for 4 months, I really enjoyed Arizona. We lived in a quaint town, and I could either walk or ride my bike to most places. This was a far cry from that. I put my AirPods in again, dropping my head back against the headrest, and turned to stare out at my new companions, the cows. With each one we passed, I tried to ignore the mounting anger. My mind wandered to my parents, and tried to imagine what life would have been like had they not gone out that night. Instantly, I felt my back stiffen. Trying to calm myself, I repeated the same thing I had thought 1,000 times before. None of us asked for this life. But yet, here we are again, moving. I watched the moving truck turn right onto a street, aptly named Main Street, and felt like I had just turned onto a postcard from the 1950s. Multiple mom-and-pop style stores lined the street, most of which had a small porch, and of those, many had a set of rocking chairs, some occupied by people fanning themselves. It was late September, and although the temperatures could still be scorching, the meteorologist announced today to be on the milder side, which would make unpacking more bearable. To the right was a large burger-style restaurant just as you entered the town, and seemed to be the primary place for everyone to hang out, as there was a mass of teens and families surrounding it. Across the street there was a gas station, with a man that was filling the tanks and washing windshields. Up ahead, a large sign was hung across the street, reading Annual Williston Farmers and Flea Market. Just past it was a series of tents lining the side streets, and under each were small tables with various items on each. "Oh, look, a real farmer's market," Aunt Cora cooed. Her excitement caused the corner of my lip to lift, but I was still mad, so I would not give them the satisfaction of a full smile. At the end of Main Street, there was a large sign noting the Williston Public School. As I searched the area, confusion set in when I realized there were no buildings in sight. "Do they learn in tents? Where's the school?" I asked. Uncle Roman glanced back at me, smiling, before reading the sign. "No, there are buildings back there. Apparently it's a gigantic complex where all the students go together. The realtor said it's like a giant box with one side each for the elementary school, middle school, high school, and community college." Momentary intrigue at a school where students ranged from toddlers to 20 was quickly won out by disinterest. Not wanting to delve further into a school that I would not be attending, I resumed my previous position. Curious to see the rest of the town, I was shocked when I realized we'd already gone through it. Again, we passed fields of cows. No, wait, I see a horse out there. We continued for a short distance before spotting a large stucco gateway with Crystal Shore Luxury Living embossed in bronze lettering across a warm blue background on the right, and its appearance in the middle of nowhere was distressing. The truck turned into the gated area and we followed. The area surrounding it was wooded with gnarly tall trees that had some sort of gray-colored mesh hanging from it. Watching the long tendrils as they swayed gently in the breeze felt as though they were welcoming me. Hypnotized by the movement, I was abruptly brought back to reality when I heard Aunt Cora say, "It's Spanish moss." I looked up, confused by what she had said. "The stuff hanging off the trees. It's called Spanish moss." Nodding, I turned to look out the window again. Up ahead on the right were large construction vehicles on a sizable cleared area. Closer to the road, a sign in front read, "Future site of the Crystal Shore Clubhouse," with a picture depicting its intended design. It was going to have a gym, gathering area, 2 pools, and a large water slide. I guess it would be epic when they finished it. A twinge of regret touched a nerve, as I realized I would likely never see the completed project. Returning my thoughts to the window, I was instantly confused as we passed a multitude of street signs that did not have a corresponding street attached to them. "Why is there a sign without a street?" I asked. Uncle Roman, apparently thinking the same thing, answered, "I think it's where the streets are eventually going to be located." "Kind of gets you in the mood for Halloween," Aunt Cora said in a spooky voice, while she wiggled her fingers at me. "Seriously? Are we the only people living here?" I asked with true concern. Uncle Roman chuckled. "No, they built from the outer perimeter in so they could build the clubhouse without driving the homeowners crazy." Content with the response, I returned to my observations. In the distance was a road off to the left with 3 houses in the middle of a cleared field. Passing by a small street to the right, I saw many more houses, and felt my heart lift at the thought that we weren't living in a community of 3. Ahead of us, the truck pulled into the small court with the 3 houses on it. Passing the street sign, I noted we would now live on Crystal Court. Uncle Roman waited at the bottom of the road as we watched the movers skillfully maneuver around the court and back into the driveway of 3501. "How did they come up with the house numbers? I don't think there are even 35 houses in this community, let alone 3,500, I said. "The 35 refers to the section of the community we're in, and the 01 refers to the house number in that section," Uncle Roman explained. Nodding, I glanced back to the truck and could see that the movers were parked and jumping out of the truck. Pulling up next to them, I grabbed my AirPods, laptop, and a small wooden box with a wolf on it before I stepped out of the car. Stretching, I watched as Aunt Cora walked up to the house to get the key, which was being stored in a key box on the front door. Examining our new home, I noted it was a 2-story Mediterranean style with a 2-car garage. Before moving, we had decided that I would get the second floor to myself so I could have more privacy. Instinctively, my eyes moved up to where my new quarters would be located, and found myself confused by a small balcony over the garage. Uncle Roman, watching my gaze, walked over. "You can't actually go out onto it. It's more for show. They call it a Juliet balcony." Dropping one eyebrow while I lifted the other, I stared at him. "Why would you build something you can't use?" Before he could answer, Aunt Cora walked back to us and followed our glance. "Oh, the Juliet balcony. It was what made me want this house. Come on, boys, the door is open." Uncle Roman and I looked at each other and he shrugged, pointing to Aunt Cora. "Does that answer your question?" I couldn't help but smile as I followed Aunt Cora into the house. As we approached the front door, I had a strong sense that we were being watched. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the curtains to the house on the right shift. Uncle Roman must have seen it as well. We'll unpack today and meet the neighbors tomorrow, he said. Let them know the Manson family hasn't moved in, right? I teased. Yes, something like that. The entrance of the house had a large foyer with stairs to the right, and a tall ceiling going all the way to the second floor. Beyond the foyer was a small hallway that opened to the kitchen and a small breakfast nook to the left. At the far end of the kitchen was a half wall with a sink and extra cabinets, allowing for better access to the main dining area just beyond it. To the right, adjacent to the dining area, was the family room, and just beyond that was Aunt Cora and Uncle Roman's room. In the backyard, there was a large screened-in patio with a pool, and a raised jacuzzi attached to the pool. Go upstairs and check out your area, Aunt Cora suggested. I nodded as I backtracked to the foyer, where the stairs were, and made my way up. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway with an enormous bathroom to the right, a smaller bedroom to the left, and the large bedroom I had seen from the driveway straight ahead. Curious, I headed to the front bedroom and looked out the windows. Down below, I could see the three movers and my uncle moving back and forth from the truck into the house. Across the street was a smaller house of similar design, with a minivan and an old beat-up pickup truck in the driveway. Shifting my attention to the window facing the middle house, I glanced down. There was a small garden-like patio with Edison bulbs strung across the tiled floor, and a large outdoor fireplace surrounded by patio furniture. As I was about to turn, I heard the door to the house next door swing open, and a girl around my age bounded out with a book in her arm. She was wearing a light blue sundress that fell just above her knees, a yellow cardigan, and bright yellow sandals. Her hair was down, but short, just above her shoulders. As she walked to the long chaise lounge, her tight curls bounced slightly. The sun seemed to play within each curl, highlighting the occasional gold strands within the brown sugar base. Everything seemed to stop when I saw her. All I could think was, she was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. I think her name is Isabel. A voice came from the doorway, causing me to jump. Turning, I could see my aunt smiling at me. She walked across the empty room toward the closet, looking around and nodding in approval. I think this will do nicely for you. Slowly, she sauntered over toward the window I was standing at, and looked down to where Isabel was now sitting before looking back up at me. Smiling, she cupped my cheek in her hand. Yes, I think you will do very nicely here. Aunt Cora, stop! She let go of my cheek and shrugged. I said nothing. I was simply making an observation. As I was about to continue my argument, I heard a movement in the stairwell, and walked over to see the movers carrying up my bed frame. It's going in this room, my aunt motioned to the men. Turning to me, she said, Looks like your stuff will be unloaded first. Do you need help to get your room together? Thank you, but I want to try by myself this time. If I get stuck, I know where to go look. Oh? Where will that be? You'll be in the kitchen making your cookies, brownies, and cakes for our meet and greet with the neighbors tomorrow. Although, it doesn't look like you have to make too much this time. I motioned out the window to our scarcity of neighbors. Sighing, she said, I suppose you're right, but I think some brownies are still in order. As the boxes piled up, I tried to work on clearing them as soon as possible. Fortunately, the movers put the furniture together, leaving me with just the placement of the smaller items around the room. Although we likely won't be here for longer than 6 months, I really hated living out of boxes, and putting my room together gave at least a small sense of normalcy. By the time Uncle Roman called me down to eat, I only had 4 boxes left, which contained miscellaneous items. Not sure what to do with them, I carried them to the other room on the second floor that we were going to use as a guest room. We have lived in several houses that have had a guest room, but I don't remember ever actually having a guest over. So when they bought the trundle bed for it, I thought it was a waste of money. Jace, dinner's ready, Uncle Roman called. I'm coming! Walking down the stairs, I could see that they adorned the once barren foyer with a large dresser-style cabinet opposite the front door, with a glass bowl and large vase with shells and tall beach grass. Above the cabinet was a large circular mirror with scalloped edges. When I looked in the mirror, I could see family pictures hanging on the wall below the stairs. Continuing through the foyer was the kitchen, which was also fully assembled. The breakfast nook now contained a small table, and a large table was placed in the dining room. The latter could easily feed 10. As I sat at the dining table, I turned to look at the family room, which was completely transformed. A large sectional couch facing the fireplace encompassed most of the room, and my uncle's favorite reclining chair was opposite it. Feeling a bit mischievous, I jokingly asked Aunt Cora, I thought you said that chair was going to get lost in translation. Uncle Roman's eyes narrowed as he looked in the living room and then back to us. I knew you two were conspiring against my poor lazy boy, so I got the movers to get it on the truck before it could go missing. Aunt Cora seemed to change the decor of the house every other move, and Uncle Roman's poop-brown lazy boy no longer matched her seafoam green sectional and white accent tables. Don't look at me. She wants to replace it. Gee, thanks, Aunt Cora said, jokingly swatting my arm. It's broken in. Took me years to get it just right. She sighed heavily. Maybe I can get a slipcover for it so it matches. How's your unpacking going? Uncle Roman asked me. Great. I just have 4 boxes left. I put them in the guest room for now. Aunt Cora frowned. Do you need help with it? I don't want boxes out if we don't need to. You're probably the only person on the planet that can pack an entire house in less than 2 days, and put one back together just as fast. No one will lift an eye at 4 boxes 8 hours after moving in. Uncle Roman raised an eyebrow and nodded slightly. He has a point, Cora. She playfully let out a flustered sigh. I guess you're right. But if someone comments on it, I'm throwing you both under the bus. We both laughed at the absurdity of her statement. The house was complete, an art form that Aunt Cora had perfected within the last 10 or so moves. So, Jace seems to have noticed a certain neighbor of ours, Aunt Cora said, with a coy nod toward my uncle. He initially stared at her blankly, and then his brows raised as the realization of who she was talking about hit him. Ah, yes, I think you and Marcus are the same age. One thing I love about my uncle is that he tries not to over-dramatize things. Aunt Cora, conversely, seems to thrive on gossip. I think it's mostly because she never really has anyone she can do it with, so Uncle Roman and I are the unwilling participants. Aunt Cora, please. I was looking out the window when she came out. There's nothing more to it. So, we're not talking about the boy across the way? Uncle Roman asked. Aunt Cora smiled sweetly at Uncle Roman, as she playfully swatted at him, then looked back at me. Okay. I won't say anything further about the way your jaw was on the floor as you were just looking out the window. I felt my cheeks flush and looked down at my food. Cora, leave the boy alone. Let him get used to being in the house before you get him married off. Aunt Cora laughed. There'll be many more adventures before you're hearing wedding bells. Oh my God, please, the 2 of you, I said, exacerbated. Let's watch what we say, Jace. Yes, sir. I'm sorry for the outburst. Aunt Cora's just teasing you. He turned to look out the back door before returning his attention to me. Still light outside? Maybe after dinner you'd like to go for a bike ride or a walk? He asked. Turning to look in the same direction he just was, I could see that the sky was still bright with the beginnings of warm amber glows in the distance. We likely had roughly an hour left in the day. I'd like that. Great. Cora, would you like to join us? Aunt Cora looked to the table, and then around the house again. Although it was clean and appeared to have been lived in for years, she drew her eyebrows in tight. I think I still have some stuff that needs attending to here. Next time. After dinner, Uncle Roman and I went to change into some more comfortable clothes before heading out. He grabbed a few flashlights, and we went out through the open garage door. In the distance, I could hear the loud chirping of the cicadas mixing with the grasshoppers, which made for an interesting mix of melodies. The day was still warm from this afternoon, but a cool breeze was coming through, and I was grateful for the sweatpants and light zip-up sweater I took with me. As we walked to the edge of the driveway and down the road, we remained silent. In my periphery, I could see him periodically looking toward me, as though he wanted to talk about something, but could not find the words. Maybe he wanted to apologize for all the moves. Perhaps he was going to tell me that this was the last one, that I could be a normal 10th grader. But none of that was said or asked, and the tension between us was quickly becoming palpable. I needed to break the silence, but with what? Before I could come up with something, though, he spoke. The boy across the street. His name is Marcus, and his mom is going to be your tutor. I turned to look at him, stunned. My teacher will be on the same street as me? Seriously? The corner of Uncle Roman's lip turned up as he watched me, and then motioned to turn left at the bottom of the road. Yes, it is a bit of a win-win. She's 2 doors away, so there's no reason for her to be late, and she can get home quickly if needed. If you have problems or questions, she'd be right there. Also, she has a boy in 10th grade as well. I stared at him for a bit, trying to figure if I was happy with this arrangement or not. He looked back at me, and a big smile crossed his face, as he put his arms around my shoulder and pulled me close to him. How'd you get so big? It's only a few years ago you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I chuckled and said, a grasshopper? Well, I think you'll fit in fine with the local linguistics. Looking back at my uncle, I realized that I no longer needed to look up to meet his eyes. I was now eye to eye with him. Feeling a smile creep across my face, I tried to draw an imaginary line from my head to his, and he ducked out of the way. Oh, no, you don't. There's no way I'll have you outgrowing me as a 14-year-old. After you're 15 in 2 weeks, then we'll talk. I laughed and tried again for the makeshift measurement. He grabbed me around the neck, so I pulled out and ducked behind him. Smiling, he bent his knees and put his hands up, challenging me to get past him. Standing back, I measured my odds. Then I rushed toward him, bobbing and weaving to avoid capture. After successfully evading his grasp twice, I misstepped and ran right into him. Without warning, he quickly threw my head into a tight grip and began rubbing his knuckles across my head vigorously in a noogie. He loved this game, as the only way out was for me to say uncle. I fought to avoid having to say the words, and he grounded slightly harder on my head. Finally, I succumbed to his demands. Uncle! 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 Laughing, but somewhat out of breath, he released me. I think it'll be me on the receiving end of this in the not-too-distant future. I smiled as he gently nudged my arm. Soon we were continuing in silence again. I know the moves are rough on you, he finally spoke, interrupting the quiet. Not knowing what to say, I continued to walk, staring into a field opposite to where he was standing. There was so much I wanted to say, but knew it wouldn't change anything. His hand clasped me on the shoulder, turning me to look at him. Jace, I love you. I've always loved you and will always love you. Please know that everything your aunt and I do is always with your best interests in mind. He looked deep into my eyes, and I could see true hurt and concern in them. Not knowing what else to say to ease the situation, I just nodded. He continued to stare at me as he lifted his hands and cupped them around the back of my neck, placing his forehead against mine. We only want what's best for you. We'll do everything to see you're safe and well protected. I nodded again before he pulled away. As we resumed our walk, his words echoed in my head, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. What do you mean, by keeping me safe and well protected? His eyes widened slightly, and his cheeks flushed, which was an odd reaction for a man who was always so strong and reserved. After a few steps, he answered, You're a teenager. By nature of what you are, trouble will be apt to follow you. I laughed. I think I've done a good job of staying out of trouble this far. He looked at me and smiled. Yes, I guess you have. Seeing you get older, though, makes me realize that I'm getting older, too. And I'm not ready for it. Like this hair. When did I go gray? He ran his head through his hair, causing it to stand up slightly. He looked like a deranged porcupine, and I chuckled at the sight. Oh, this is funny, huh? Get over here for another noogie. Seeing him lunge at me, I broke out into a run and started dodging and weaving again, both of us laughing as I did. Suddenly, Uncle Roman stopped short, which caused me to do the same. In the distance, I could hear dogs barking. What? I asked. He shook his head. It's likely nothing. But we're still in a developing community that's mostly open fields. I wouldn't expect to hear dogs. He continued scanning the field where we had heard them. Let's head back home. The sun's almost down, and I'm sure your aunt has 1,000 things for me to move, put together, or hang up. I looked back at the field and then at Uncle Roman. At my nod, we turned and headed back toward the house, but his pace had noticeably increased. What's going on? You look as though you saw a ghost. Clicking on the flashlight, he slowed his stride a bit and smiled at me. I guess my inner kid took hold. We're in a new place with no one around and a pack of dogs in the distance that we can't see. My fight-or-flight instinct must have kicked in. I searched his face and looked back over my shoulder. He'd never shown fear like that, and it slightly unnerved me. Turning back toward our block, I could see the lights from the 3 houses turning on. I'll race you back, I said. He turned to me and smiled. You're on, and he took off running. Hey, that's not fair, I shouted as I ran, quickly catching up to him. Turning onto Crystal Court, I took the lead as I was on the inside of the turn. He grabbed onto my shirt as we maintained our sprint for home. For the rest of the makeshift race, we continued grabbing at each other and arrived at the driveway at the same time. I would have won, I said. I beg to differ. He grinned, although visibly winded. I bent down to catch my own breath when I heard a clanking sound, which caused me to stand. Now both of us were looking in the direction it had come from. Across the court was a boy about my age, with a bike flipped over and a series of tools strewn across the floor. He looked frazzled as he picked up tool after tool, staring at it before dropping it back on the mat. I glanced at Uncle Roman, who smiled. Looks like you need some help. If you need any tools, I'll keep the garage open. I nodded and walked across the street. Chapter 2. Marcus. I grabbed the flashlight from Uncle Roman and made my way across the court to the other teen. To keep from startling him, I purposely swayed my flashlight back and forth so he would notice the movement heading toward him, and when I was within a few feet, he looked up and over his shoulder at me. "Are you the new kid that just moved in?" he asked. "That would be me. My name's Jace Northall." As he stood and turned toward me, I could see that he was slightly shorter than I was, maybe 5'8". He had auburn hair that appeared in desperate need of a haircut. His chin had the scruff of a 5 o'clock shadow crossing it, and his attire were comparatively baggy, which made it hard to tell if he was slightly overweight or just hiding in the larger clothes. As he spun around to meet me, he extended a fist. On seeing it, I reciprocated, bumping mine against his. "My name's Marcus Hunter. So, what do you know about bike chains?" he asked as he ran his hand through his hair while looking back at the bike. "I've had to replace a chain or two." Looking across the tools he had strewn across the towel, I quickly realized he lacked the ones he would need. Since we had just moved in, I was not completely sure where the tools would be, but Uncle Roman typically tried to keep all our garages set up the same way from house to house. "You're missing what you'll need, but I know we have them. Do you want to come over to help me look for it?" He looked back at the house and winced. How many boxes do you have to get through?" I laughed. "You haven't seen my family move into a house. We unpacked everything already." "Get the hell out of here. You just moved in it like 12 hours ago. Now I feel that I have to go." He stood, and we started walking toward my house. Entering the garage, I swung the flashlight back and forth, looking for the light switch. Marcus casually walked to the back wall near the door, running his hands along the wall. After a quick search, I heard a click, and the fluorescent bulbs illuminated the room. "The same people built all these houses, so I figured yours would be in the same spot as mine." "Yeah, that makes sense." He looked around the room and nodded in approval. Although there was not much in the garage, it was neat and organized. The garbage was even in a neat pile in the corner. "So, where do you think this tool will be?" "Likely in the toolbox. I'm just not sure which drawer." On the far back wall was a large red toolbox, and as I opened the drawers, Marcus's jaw visibly dropped. My uncle was also a bit of an organization buff and had lined all the drawers in foam, arranging each tool into their respective slots. "Your dad would have a stroke if he saw my toolbox. It takes just as long to find anything as it does to put it together." He's actually my uncle. My parents died when I was 3. Marcus's face flushed red as he looked up from the toolbox to me, and then back to the drawer. "Oh, man, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "How could you? I just moved here. You just met me 10 minutes ago. It's cool, really." He looked back at me, his brows knitted as if trying to judge my intention. Realizing that the mistake had not devastated me, his features relaxed and he smiled. Returning our energy back to the task at hand, we started on the top shelf, then worked our way down. I found the first of the tools I was looking for in the third drawer. "Got one." Marcus took it, visibly perplexed by its appearance. After turning it around and examining it from every angle, he lifted it in the air and pointed to it with his shoulders slightly shrugged, causing me to smile. It definitely looked odd, like a cross between pliers and a corkscrew. "That pops the bad part of the chain out. I need to find the tool to put it back together and the lever to help get it back on the wheel." I stopped rummaging for a second and looked back at Marcus, who was still examining the chain splitter. "Thinking about it, do you have links to replace the broken one?" He stopped and stared at me dumbly, and I couldn't help but smile. "I'll take that as a no. I'm sure we have some in here." After a few minutes, I had all the tools we would need to put the bike back in working order. Taking the tools from Marcus, we walked back to his driveway. "Can you hold the flashlight while I fix it?" I asked him. Marcus nodded, and I started checking the chain for the broken piece. Once located, I quickly went to work fixing the broken link. Marcus knelt opposite me, diligently keeping the flashlight fixed on where I was working. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see his head shifting to watch what I was doing, nodding periodically as I worked. When I finished, I flipped the bike back over and told him to take it for a quick ride. Handing me the flashlight, he jumped on and rode it around, before bringing it back into the driveway. "Thanks, man. I wasn't sure how I'd fix it, and I really didn't want to bring it to Mr. Hendrickson. He owns the bike store in town and charges an arm and a leg to fix stuff. It's almost cheaper to buy a new bike than let him fix it." "That's crazy. The kit is really cheap, and now you know how to fix it yourself." He nodded, and we looked around the driveway at the massive tools, one of which was a hammer. I picked it up and looked at him with a half smile as I raised an eyebrow. "It's a fix-all," he said with a shrug. "A fix-all?" "Yeah, it fixes everything, especially when you need something to take your frustration out on." I laughed and started picking up the rest of the tools with him. As we walked toward his garage, I could see the colossal mess of stuff everywhere. Marcus looked at me, and his cheeks flushed as he began running his hand through his hair again. Yeah, I'm not nearly as organized as your uncle. I have a box over there for the tools. Just outside the garage on the floor was a small beat-up green metal box, stuffed nearly to capacity. I looked from the box to him and frowned. You're gonna need a bigger box. Marcus smiled. Great movie reference. I love Jaws. It's one of my favorites too. Do you have anything bigger we can use? I don't think all this stuff's gonna fit in there. Marcus ran his hands through his hair again as he looked around the room. By now, his hair was standing up on its end from the constant abuse he was giving it. I'm sure there's something around here somewhere. I cringed as I looked into the hoard. How about we grab a box from my house? I can put these away too. I motioned to the tools I borrowed. Marcus spun on his heels and pointed a finger at me. That is a much better idea. I laughed and we headed back to my house. As I was trying to put a box together, Uncle Roman opened the door into the garage and jumped a bit when he saw us.
Oh, boys, I wasn't expecting you to be in here. What are you doing?
Uncle Roman, this is Marcus. He needs something to hold his tools in, so I was going to put his excess tools into a box for now. Uncle Roman frowned at the box I was making.
You're going to need something sturdier than that.
I have a box that was my dad's, but it's already filled.
Let's see what I have over here.
Uncle Roman walked over to a wall adorned with cabinets and shelving and looked around. Smiling, he moved some of the garbage out of the way. Then he rolled out a brand new toolbox, much like his, but only about half as tall. The appearance of the extra box slightly perplexed me, as I had not remembered there being a second one when we were just in the garage. Shaking the thought off, I watched as he rolled it out from its hiding spot for Marcus to look at.
I think this will do nicely.
Marcus's eyes went wide. Thank you, sir, but I can't possibly.
I insist. A man should have a well-organized and functioning toolbox. Now go get your dad's box and we'll get this put together.
Marcus stood there stunned and unable to move. I patted him on the back and turned him toward his house. He won't take no for an answer, so you may as well go get them. He nodded as we walked back, but on the way he kept shaking his head. Where am I even going to put it? I was thinking the same thing, but was unsure of what I should say. As we were picking up the stray tools, I heard footsteps behind us and turned to see Uncle Roman walking up the drive. As he looked past us and into the garage, his eyes widened.
Wow, that's quite the space you have in there.
Marcus's cheeks shone red. Yes, sir. Uncle Roman stood looking at the area and then back to us.
Okay, we'll keep the box in our garage while you clear out some room for it in here.
Marcus nodded as he looked back at the garage, then began running his hand through his hair again.
Jace, do you think you can help him clear it?
I looked at the monstrous mess that was basically from the floor to the ceiling and gulped. Yeah, sure. Maybe over the next week or two we can get it organized. To Marcus, he said,
Perfect, then it's settled. Get the tools you can see and bring them by us for now.
Uncle Roman picked up the tattered green box and a few stray tools that surrounded it before turning and heading back to our house. I surveyed the garage, trying to judge how far I could reach before risking an avalanche. Marcus seemed to contemplate the same thing when he finally spoke up. The easiest stuff to grab was in the front, and he already walked away with it. Okay, then let's head back to my house and help him organize it. As we grew closer, I could see Uncle Roman going through the tools on the bench in the back of our garage.
You have a good starter set in here.
They were my dad's before he left. Uncle Roman looked up from the tools to Marcus, and then to me. As he was about to speak, the door to the garage opened, and Aunt Cora poked her head out. There you guys are, and I see we have company. She quickly exited the house, walked over to Marcus, and took his hand in hers.
Cora, this is Marcus. Marcus, this is my wife Cora.
Aunt Cora quickly surveyed the garage and then looked back at Marcus. Well, Marcus, do you like brownies? Marcus's lips curved. Yes, ma'am, I do. Wonderful. You can test out my first batch in the new house. With no further hesitation, she slipped her arm into his and walked him into the house.
We'd better go save him, Uncle Roman said.
Following, I watched as Aunt Cora walked Marcus over to a spot at the table and told him to sit. Then she turned to look at us and motioned that we take a seat as well. She dashed back into the kitchen and returned with a plate piled high with her delicious brownies. Watching the plate as she placed it on the table, Uncle Roman started rubbing his hands together. He playfully eyed Marcus and me as though daring us to take one before him.
I may be biased, but Cora makes the best brownies I've ever eaten.
he said. Aunt Cora swatted Uncle Roman on the arm. He grabbed her around the waist and pulled her onto his lap and gave her a kiss. "Oh, seriously, you two?" I moaned. Aunt Cora giggled as she moved over to the seat between Marcus and Uncle Roman. "Marcus, you take the first one." She lifted the plate toward him, and he withdrew a corner piece. She then handed the plate around with each of us pulling a brownie from it. As we each took a bite, Aunt Cora watched us with anticipation in her eyes. "Miss Cora, these are the most amazing brownies I ever had," Marcus said. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as her smile widened. "I'm so glad that you like them. Please, have another." Marcus smiled and grabbed a second helping as he began looking around the house. "Whoa, you weren't kidding. If I hadn't watched you guys move in this morning, I would have sworn you'd been here for years." "I told you, she has it down to an art," I said. Aunt Cora smiled as she looked around the room. "No one likes to live out of boxes. Over the years, we've downsized to the necessities, which really helps." "The house looks amazing," Marcus said. As he finished his sentiment, the clock on the wall behind the dining room table chimed, and we all looked at it. "Oh man, 9 o'clock. I didn't realize it was so late. My mom's gonna think the stray dogs got me." Uncle Roman sat up straighter in his chair at Marcus's last statement.
"Stray dogs?"
"Yeah, there was a family that lived just outside the community and moved, but they forgot to take their dogs with them. People around town have been trying to feed them. Even so, it's been a few weeks. They're getting quite nasty. Animal control's been trying to catch them, but they're a bit too fast." Uncle Roman shifted uncomfortably in his seat and looked at Aunt Cora.
"Let Jace and I walk you back to your house. If wild dogs are running around, meeting them at night is not the best idea."
Standing, Marcus looked back at Aunt Cora and smiled. "Thank you for the brownies. They were delicious." "You're most welcome. Whenever you want more, just let me know." "Oh, I will," he announced.
"All right, let's get you back home," Uncle Roman said.
We left through the garage, and Uncle Roman gave each of us a flashlight. Hearing the story of the wild dogs had put us all on edge. Although it was only a few hundred feet between the houses, we all periodically swept the perimeter with the lights.
"Where do you keep your bike?" Uncle Roman asked.
"On the side of the house. It sorta doesn't fit in the garage." Uncle Roman looked at the garage and nodded in understanding.
"We can take it back with us if you like. Cora's usually home and can let you in whenever you need it."
Marcus thought about it and then nodded. "Thank you, but I feel like I'm taking over your garage." Uncle Roman chuckled.
"Even more incentive to get your garage back in order."
Marcus ran his hand through his hair. "Yes, I guess you're right. Besides, my mom will be happy to have a place to put stuff in."
"Let's get the garage closed up," Uncle Roman said.
He hit the button on the door, causing it to creak and come to life, slowly closing. From the front door, we could hear a voice calling. "Marcus, is that you? Did you fix the bike yet?" "Yes, Mom. Our new neighbors helped." A small, petite woman with shoulder-length auburn hair that matched Marcus's met us by the garage. "You must be the Northalls. Oh, I'm so happy to finally meet you in person." She looked from Uncle Roman to me, lifting her head as she did. "What did you feed him in Arizona?" she teased, looking up at me.
"The usual, but I swear Cora's putting some Miracle Grow in his food."
Mrs. Hunter laughed as she extended her hand to each of us. "I am Mary Hunter. Jace, I'll be your teacher starting Monday." She looked back to Uncle Roman wide-eyed and asked, "We are starting Monday, right?"
"If that's okay with you."
"Absolutely," she answered, grinning widely.
"Wonderful. I sent you his previous school curriculum and transcripts. Did you get everything?"
"Oh my, yes. Jace is very advanced and way ahead of the schools here. We could likely appeal to advance him to 11th grade if you wanted." I looked at Marcus and felt my cheeks flush. Following my eyes, she looked over to her son and then back to me. "But that's all stuff we can discuss on Monday. I'm thrilled that you two have met and hit it off. Marcus, you've been out here for hours." It was Uncle Roman who replied.
"The boys fixed the bike, and I offered to store it in our garage for the time being."
Mrs. Hunter's eyes widened as she looked at Marcus. "I can't fit it in the garage. Jace offered to help me organize it, so I can use it to store the bike in a toolbox Mr. Northall just gave me." "Oh my, I sure missed a lot. Mr. Northall."
"Please, call me Roman."
"Right, Roman, thank you for the offer, but you did not have to go through all that trouble, especially with the toolbox."
"It's a spare box I had, and he needed something bigger than what he has. Please, I insist, as a new neighbor."
Mrs. Hunter looked uneasily between Marcus and Uncle Roman. "I would feel more comfortable if we paid you for the box."
It's really unnecessary, but if it'll make you feel better, we can work something out.
Yes, please. I genuinely appreciate the gesture, but I would feel more comfortable that way.
Then it's a deal. Jason and I are gonna head home now. We just wanted to make sure Marcus made it here in one piece.
Mrs. Hunter looked confused as her eyes took in our house and then us. The dogs, Mom, Marcus muttered. Ah, yes, they have been trying for weeks to get them. Thank you.
We'll be by again tomorrow. My wife always bakes treats for our neighbors when we move.
Sounds delicious. We'll see you tomorrow then. Marcus turned to me, lifting his fist, and I bumped mine off his. Thank you again, sir, Marcus said, shaking Uncle Roman's hand.
You're most welcome. We'll see you tomorrow.
As we walked away, we gave them both one quick wave. Again, we scanned the perimeter of the yards for anything that could be waiting. Although we saw nothing, the thought of a pack of animal control-evading dogs made my skin crawl. I felt my pace quicken as we walked to our driveway. Rushing into the garage, Uncle Roman quickly hit the button on the wall, allowing the door to close. I opened the house door and jumped when I nearly walked right into Aunt Cora, causing Uncle Roman to do so as well. You two are jumpier than long-tailed cats in a room full of rocking chairs. I smiled at the absurdity of the comment and kissed her on the cheek as I walked past. I'm gonna continue putting some stuff together upstairs before going to bed. I'll see you guys in the morning. Good night, kiddo, Aunt Cora said.
Good work today. Sleep tight,
Uncle Roman hollered from inside the garage. Thank you, and good night, I answered. When I got to my room, I walked over to the window facing the front of the house. My eyes scanned the darkness surrounding our homes, and I wondered if the dogs were nearby. I then looked toward Marcus's house and saw a light was on in the front window. From my vantage point, I could clearly see Marcus, who was wearing a headset and looking at a computer screen on his desk. Realizing that if I could see him, he could see me, I pulled away from the window and prepared for bed. I pulled the sheets back and lay on the freshly laundered bedding. Then I took a deep breath and imagined my old room. As I closed my eyes, I reviewed my day and couldn't help but smile. Although I hated moving, this move started with a pretty cool friendship. Turning onto my side, I opened my eyes again to look at the side window. As I recalled the girl from this morning, I felt a smile cross my face again. Maybe this move was going to be better than the others. Chapter 3. Meet the Neighbors. The next morning, I woke to the alarm on my phone playing Let's Get It Started, which I found appropriate considering the day I had ahead of me. Sliding the bar on the screen to silence the alarm, I lay back on my bed and looked up at the ceiling. Noticing it had the same popcorn pattern as the one in my previous room caused a smile to tug at the corner of my lip. I stretched deep before sitting up, surveying my new surroundings. The first morning in a new house always seems to be the strangest. When you lie down the night before, it's almost as though it is a dream. Only when you wake up, you realize you did in fact move. Walking to my dresser, I looked out the front window to see if there was any movement on our little court. Slowly draping across the ground was the warm glow of the new sunrise, illuminating our little corner of Williston. Standing there transfixed, I marveled at the variation of colors and reawakening of the world below. Shifting my attention back to our street for movement, I decided our court does not contain early risers, at least on Saturdays. Grabbing some clothes from the drawer, I headed to the bathroom to prepare for the day. By the time I had finished and was making my way down the stairs, I could smell a small feast being prepared by Aunt Cora. Good morning. How did you sleep? Aunt Cora asked when she saw me. Uncle Roman looked up from the paper he was reading at hearing Aunt Cora. Great. I didn't realize how tired I was when I lay down last night, I answered.
Yes, the moving usually does a number on me as well. I'm actually surprised you're up so early. We lost 2 hours in the move here. I figured it would be closer to 10 by the time we saw you, Uncle Roman said.
Well, black-eyed peas woke me up, but if they hadn't, I'm sure the sun would have done the trick. Uncle Roman stared at me, visibly confused, placing a plate of bacon on the table. Aunt Cora shook her head and kissed his cheek. It's a band. Lifting his eyebrows in understanding, he nodded at her statement and returned to his newspaper, which made me smile. We're getting the paper already? Instantly, I knew it was a stupid question. Aunt Cora and Uncle Roman have everything set up well before we arrive. For instance, we had food delivered yesterday, so that Aunt Cora would not have to drive into town. Ultimately, it gave her more time to set up the house, and peace of mind knowing we had plenty of food. Following the same logic, I'm sure Uncle Roman set up the delivery weeks ago for it to start today. Seeing he was about to answer, I raised my hand. No, it was a dumb question. He looked at Aunt Cora, then back at me and laughed.
Am I that predictable? He asked.
With moving and a fresh restart? Yes, I answered.
I don't know, Cora. It seems we're not very spontaneous in our old age anymore.
Please don't, I begged, seeing where he was going with that statement. As any teen can attest, there must be a rulebook somewhere mandating your parents to embarrass you with their overabundant signs of affection toward each other. My aunt and uncle seem to take it to the next level. On the one hand, I hope to have a love like theirs myself. On the other, though, ew. Call yourself old, Mr. Northall. I'm still young and spry, Aunt Cora teased.
Let's see. I must be about 267, and you're considerably younger at, 193?
Aunt Cora's eyes widened as she looked at me with a smile. Don't give away all our secrets, she exclaimed. I laughed at the ridiculousness of their theatrics and started filling my plate with waffles, bacon, and fresh fruit. It seems the people in this area like their sleep on the weekends. I figure we can head out around lunchtime, Aunt Cora said. Uncle Roman looked up from his paper, as though he had just realized there was food, and nodded at her.
Sounds good to me. First things first, breakfast.
Folding the paper up, he rubbed his hands vigorously before looking across the table at the food in front of him. Watching my uncle eat is always entertaining, since he always rubs his hands together as though he needs to warm them up before he can start. After placing the last of the meal on the table, Aunt Cora finally sat down. Realizing that I had not grabbed myself a drink, I stood to go to the kitchen, which made Aunt Cora jump up from her seat as well. What did I forget? I laughed. Nothing. I forgot to get myself a drink. Please, sit.
Good man, Jace, Uncle Roman said.
I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Grabbing the milk, I turned to get a cup, when I realized I wasn't entirely sure where they were. Before I could ask, Aunt Cora, who had been watching my every move from the table, was out of her seat to help me.
Cora, he's gonna be 15. I'm sure he can handle pouring himself a drink. Just tell him where the cups are, Uncle Roman said sternly. Stopping in mid-stride, she sat back down and directed me to the proper cabinet. I glanced back at her and couldn't help but chuckle. Am I doing it the right way? I teased. Ha ha, I'm just not ready to have you all grown up yet. Uncle Roman tilted his head at her and stared. My dear, it's in your nature to be in control, and you don't do well when you're not.
She stopped watching me and turned to look at him. I am not controlling.
How long have I known you? You are, and it's one of the many things I love about you. In fact, we would never be as successful in these moves without you and your controlling ways.
I cringed at the way he phrased it, watching for her reaction. She knitted her brows together and squinted her eyes at him. Roman Northall, I'm not sure if that was an insult or a compliment. Uncle Roman burst out laughing and put his fork down to grab her hand. She continued to stare at him, but her anger was quickly being replaced by a mischievous smile. Well, for your sake, I'll take it as a compliment. Now let's eat. As we finished eating, I looked up at the clock on the wall, which showed the time was 10:38 a.m. Would it be all right if I went up and played some Castle Core until we're ready to head out? I asked.
Help clear the table first, Uncle Roman answered.
Completing my assigned chores, I made my way to my room. However, just as I was about to turn onto the stairs, our doorbell rang. Stopping mid-step, I backed up and looked at the door where I could see a mass of bodies through the embossed glass. Turning to look back toward the kitchen, I watched as Uncle Roman and Aunt Cora walked to me. Maybe they were awake? Aunt Cora said as she walked to open the door. On the other side were a man, a woman, and 3 girls. The man, who was tall and muscular with sandy blonde hair and a full beard, spoke first.
Welcome to Crystal Court. We're your neighbors. My name's Kyle. This is my wife Carolina and our daughters Alyssa, Zoe, and Isabel.
As Uncle Roman introduced us, I found myself spellbound. The girl from the porch was standing in my doorway. Seeing my obvious distraction, the only thing to break the trance that I was in was my uncle's pat on my back. Her 2 older sisters must have caught the gesture and looked at Isabel and then back at me, before snickering to themselves. They only stopped when their mother turned and said something to them in another language. Spanish, I think. Please excuse my girls. It's as though they've never met someone new before, Carolina said as she stared at them, causing the girls to drop their heads. Aunt Cora smiled. Please, come in. Are you hungry? Actually, that's part of what brought us here. Izzy, please give the tray to Mrs. Northall, Carolina said. That's an interesting name, Aunt Cora said. Izzy's cheeks flushed as she explained. Zoe couldn't say my name right when I was born, so she called me Izzy and, well, kinda stuck. Then she walked forward, holding the casserole dish with aluminum foil covering it. As Aunt Cora took it, she answered, Thank you. It smells amazing. We thought you may be hungry as you just moved in yesterday. I remember a long week of takeout after we had. We wanted to help you out with a home-cooked meal, so I whipped you up some frangoyo, Carolina said. What is frangoyo? I asked, trying to mimic her accent.
It's a delicious twist on eggs. She mixes in raisins, honey, and almonds. It's like getting breakfast and dessert together, Kyle explained.
Although I had just eaten, the smell emanating from the dish was making me drool. Looking over, I could see Uncle Roman rubbing his hands together and smiled despite myself. Please, come in. I'm sure there's enough here for all of us, Aunt Cora said as she took the plate from Izzy. We don't want to be a bother. You probably still need to unpack, and we'll only slow you down, Carolina answered. Actually, besides the 4 boxes in Jace's room, we're done, Aunt Cora said. The group stood there in silence, periodically looking past us, as though in disbelief. Please, I insist. Come in, Aunt Cora said. Smiling, Carolina nodded and followed Aunt Cora into the house. Instantly, her face changed, leaving her wide-eyed as she took in the surroundings. I've only moved a handful of times in my life, but I could never unpack this quickly, Carolina said. Maintaining my post near the door, I prepared to close it once all our guests were inside, but was distracted from my duties as Izzy strode by me. She looked in my direction, and for a brief second our eyes met. Then she turned away to catch up with her sisters. Unable to move, I watched her, feeling a rush run through me as she turned to look back at me again and smiled. In that instant, I felt a pat on my back and jumped a bit.
Let's not send the air conditioning to all of Williston, okay?
Uncle Roman whispered. One of his eyebrows arched as the corner of his lip twitched. I rolled my eyes at him and shut the door. Then I followed him to the dining room, where everyone was finding a seat around the table. Aunt Cora was in the kitchen, as was Carolina, who was pulling out dishes for everyone. Aunt Cora, looking up as I passed, asked, "Can you grab the milk and juice from the fridge?" Nodding, I grabbed the items she had requested and proceeded to our guests, who were all seated. Uncle Roman had positioned himself at one end of the table. Kyle was at the other end with the girls to his left. I positioned myself in the middle seat and opposite the girls, which would allow Aunt Cora to be closer to Uncle Roman and Carolina to be closer to Kyle. As I looked up, though, I realized I was sitting directly across Izzy and felt my cheeks flush again. She looked across and smiled before looking away.
So, what grade are you in?
Kyle asked. Words escaped me momentarily as I tried to plan a coherent sentence in response. I opened my mouth and felt my discomfort mounting at not having an answer immediately. Uncle Roman must have seen me floundering and tried to throw me a lifeline.
Jace is in 10th grade, but he may advance early to the 11th.
All 3 girls' eyes went wide as they turned to me. I hated it when he told people how advanced I was in my studies. All I wanted was to feel normal, and here he went stressing how I was different. Feeling my cheeks flush once more, I glanced at the girls to determine what they could be thinking. Izzy must have seen my reaction and furrowed her brows. So, you're a prodigy or something? Zoe asked.
Good lord, girl, where are your manners?
Kyle interrupted. What? I'm just trying to get more information, Zoe answered. Kyle dropped his head before lifting it to glare at Zoe. He turned to Uncle Roman and said,
My apologies, Roman. Zoe is my free-spirited one.
Uncle Roman laughed.
There's nothing wrong with a strong sense of curiosity.
Uncle Roman looked back at me, as though trying to judge my ability to communicate, and frowned a bit before continuing.
We've had Jace homeschooled since he was young. Being able to move at his own pace has allowed him to speed through many of his areas of study. It's also why he could be in 11th grade.
The girls were staring again, while Izzy frowned slightly. So, you won't be going to Williston High? She asked. No, Mrs. Hunter is my tutor, I answered, grateful my voice had returned. Marcus's mom? Alyssa asked. I nodded, looking awkwardly around the room. Thankfully, Aunt Cora took that as the ideal time to serve the food. She quickly placed a few spoonfuls onto each plate and began handing them around the table. Unsure of how the flavors would mix, I hesitated a bit. Kyle must have noticed because he said,
It sounds like it won't work, but it's quite tasty, I assure you.
I stabbed my fork into the center of the egg mixture, grabbing up raisins and almonds, and took a bite. This is delicious, I said.
Told you,
Kyle answered with a grin. Oh, Carolina, this is one of the most delicious things I've ever had. You're going to show me how to make this, Aunt Cora raved. Absolutely, but it is quite easy. It's one of the first things I taught the girls to make. Carolina beamed.
So, tell us about yourselves, Uncle Roman asked. I'm actually very proud of Carolina. She just opened a cafe in town, which has been doing rather well, Kyle beamed.
We opened at the beginning of September. Since then, we've had a steady stream of customers, which is all we can hope for, Carolina added.
If the food is all like this, you're going to need to set up a permanent table for me, Uncle Roman teased.
Absolutely. Just let me know when you're coming in, Carolina said.
And what about you, Kyle?
Uncle Roman asked, taking another bite of his food.
Just before we opened the cafe, I had retired as a corrections officer.
Uncle Roman glanced up across the table and nodded.
Looks like I will know where to go if I have any trouble.
Kyle chuckled and nodded back.
I'm considering starting a business in personal security, but I desperately need some time off first. I've been waking up at 4:30 a.m. for over 25 years and would love to sleep in. I can appreciate that, Uncle Roman added. How about both of you? Kyle asked. We just moved from Scottsdale, Arizona. Cora is my home base keeper, while I am a consultant physician. So, we have a doctor on the block. Looks like I will know where to go if I have any trouble too, Kyle said, earning a grin from Uncle Roman in return.
What exactly does a consultant physician do? Carolina asked.
The title holds many meanings, but for me, I help get new physicians' businesses up and running.
Are you able to tell us where you're working now? Izzy asked.
No, if the doctor wants to let people know, it's up to them.
Izzy nodded thoughtfully. If you have a business card, I can put it on the counter in the cafe to help you drum up more business, Carolina added. I felt my stomach drop and looked down at my food, slowly picking at it. Uncle Roman glanced at me and shifted slightly in his seat.
I have a headhunter who typically finds me jobs, but I think having another source of job opportunities would be great.
Not sure I heard him correctly. I looked at Uncle Roman, who smiled at me. Aunt Cora was also looking at him, and she too smiled softly as she grabbed his hand. This is so nice. Just over 24 hours in our new home and we have friends surrounding us, Aunt Cora said. The clock chimed, and Kyle looked at Carolina.
We should probably get back to the house and finish setting up, he said.
She looked over her shoulder, and her eyes widened. Oh, wow, yes. Carolina looked back at us. We are having a get-together later this afternoon and would love for you to come. It'll be a mix of adults and kids from around the area, and a great opportunity for you to meet more people. Aunt Cora looked at us, then answered, Absolutely. What time do you want us there? We're expecting everyone at 3. Can I bring anything? Aunt Cora asked. Normally, I would say you have enough to do with a new move, but it seems you're finished unpacking. So if you could bring an appetizer, that would be great. I can handle an appetizer or two, Aunt Cora answered with a wink. Everyone stood up then, and the Lewis family made their way to the front door. As they were about to leave, Izzy turned quickly, looking at me. Don't forget your bathing suit. I felt my cheeks flush and smiled. Definitely, I answered. Chapter 4. Castle Core. We waved as the Lewis family headed back to their house. I spun to head upstairs, hoping to rummage through my clothes and find something nice to wear when Aunt Cora laughed. Why, Chase Northall, I believe someone has a small crush. I froze where I stood and turned around, feeling the blood rush to my head. Uncle Roman must have seen my look and cringed slightly.
Cora, leave the boy alone.
I'm just saying, I know what I was seeing. Walking closer to me, she whispered. And it seems to be mutual. She turned to head into the kitchen, and I felt the corner of my lip lift as I looked up to see Uncle Roman watching me.
Go on. I'll call up when we're ready to head over.
Nodding, I bounded up the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 steps at a time. Quickly, I ran to the window and looked toward Izzy's house, hoping that she would come out. As I stood there, I realized that without curtains, anyone could see me. Stepping back from the window, I made a mental list to purchase some soon. I walked back to my dresser and started working my way through the handful of bathing suits I owned, trying each one on to determine the best look. Feeling overwhelmed, I heard my door open and turned to see Aunt Cora. Want some help? I looked at the bed, which was covered in clothes, and grimaced. Is it that obvious? She chuckled as she glanced at the bed. Go try some things on so I can give you a female's perspective. I smiled and grabbed a handful of clothes before heading toward the bathroom. Putting on the first bathing suit, a pair of blue shorts with pink palm trees, I walked out. I lifted my hands, shrugging as I turned around for her to better evaluate my first outfit. She touched her chin, appraising me, and then wrinkled up her face while shaking her head. It's like you're trying too hard to be from Florida. How about that one? She pointed to a gray suit with green stripes and a drawstring. Do those still fit you? There's only one way to find out. I walked into the bathroom and quickly changed into the suit. It posed the same problem I always have with clothes. The waist fits great, but the length is too short. Walking out of the room, I scrunched up one side of my face as I turned for her. Nope, way too short. I sighed as I looked at the remaining options on the bed. The other 2 are the same size. Maybe I just won't go swimming? Give me a second. She stood up and left the room, only to return a few minutes later. From the door, she tossed a plastic bag to me. Inside was a brand new bathing suit in gray and yellow stripes. I looked up at her with a smile. Where did you get this? I knew we would have a pool here and was pretty sure you had outgrown all your suits, so I bought a new one before we left Arizona. As I walked past her, I gave her a kiss on the cheek before heading to the bathroom to try on the new suit. Walking back into the room, Aunt Cora's entire face lit up at the sight. She stood and touched her hand to her mouth. It fits perfectly, and is an excellent color for you. Now, what shirt will you wear? Good question. I don't want to wear anything weird. Ha! Like Taco Kitty? She asked. Hey, Taco Kitty and I are close buds. I just don't know if this crowd is ready to meet him. I walked back to my drawers and rummaged through, trying to find something that would look good. At the bottom of the drawer was a gray t-shirt with a picture of Baby Yoda. The caption, "Don't make me use the Force," written around him. Lifting it from the drawer, I turned to look at Aunt Cora and gave a slight shrug. You can't go wrong with Baby Yoda, she agreed. Looking into the closet, she pulled out my reef sandals and handed them to me. Perfect. I think you're ready to make your grand entrance. Smiling, I walked over and wrapped my arms around her, lifting her slightly from the floor. She giggled and squirmed slightly till her feet touched the ground, and I finally let go. Thanks, Aunt Cora. I looked over at the clock, which showed it was 12:42 p.m. I think I'll play some Castlecore while I wait. Sounds good. Turning to leave, she stopped and looked back into the room. I think we need to get you some drapes in here. Oh, yeah, I was gonna ask about that. As I played, I kept checking the clock, wishing that it would move faster. After realizing that I was aimlessly wandering around Castlecore, I sat back and turned toward my new enemy, the clock. Only 1:45 p.m. I let out an exasperated sigh. Having breakfast with Izzy and her family was amazing, and I couldn't wait to see her again. I found my mind drifting, imagining all the different encounters that we could possibly have, and the thought-provoking conversations that I would amaze her with. In that instant, my heart froze. What would I say to her? I had no clue what she liked or didn't like. I stood and walked away from the computer, back to the window to look out onto the court. It was quiet again, except for some noises coming from behind the Lewis house. Unsure if I would see anything, I walked to the guest room and glanced out the side window, which overlooked their house and part of their yard. I could see smoke billowing up from the grill and could make out the silhouette of Kyle, cooking something that smelled amazing. Along the pool's perimeter, Zoe and Alyssa were busy setting out tables and chairs and decorating with a tiki theme. I searched the yard to find Izzy, but she was nowhere in sight. Maybe she's inside helping Carolina, but what if she went to a friend's house and won't be there? Panic slightly rising at the thought. Deciding that I would go insane if I continued to wait up here, I opted to go to Marcus's house till the party started. Hollering to Aunt Cora and Uncle Roman as I left, I ran out the door into his house. When I knocked on the door, Marcus answered and seemed bewildered by my presence. What's up? He asked. Nothing. I just figured I would hang out here till it's time to go next door. Marcus stood there dumbstruck. Instantly, I had a pit at the bottom of my stomach, wondering if the Lewises would have a party and not invite the only other house on the block. I felt my cheeks flush and my heart quicken its pace as I stood there, looking at him while trying to think of something to fix my mistake. Finally, his face changed into a smile, and he playfully punched me in the arm. Your face was priceless. Sure you can hang out here. Man, what would you have done if they hadn't invited us? I guess I never considered it. There are only 3 houses on the block, and it would be insane to have 2 of the 3 there and not the last. Inclining his head slightly, he answered, That makes sense. So, what do you want to do? I was playing Castlecore, I started before Marcus cut me off. Wait, you play Castlecore? Yeah? Okay, come in. That is what we're doing. Marcus grabbed me by the shirt and bodily pulled me into the house, dragging me to his room. Walking in, I felt my nose being assaulted by an overwhelming aroma of what I can only describe as a gym locker room after the football team had run laps for an hour and dropped their sweaty shirts in the corner. Take a seat, Marcus offered, seeming unperturbed by the smell. Where? As though looking around for the first time, his face shone slightly crimson. Marcus hurried around the room, grabbing clothes off his bed and the floor, and began haphazardly tossing the items in the general direction of the hamper. The room appeared to have undergone an explosion, one that had left food plates, wrappers, clothes, and a general mess strewn across every inch. There was only one spot that was spared from the tidal wave of disarray. In the far corner of the room, positioned under the large bow window, looking out to the front of his house, was an L-shaped desk. A large black high-back chair with green accent striping was parked in front of it. Sitting on the desk was a desktop, a coveted Alienware Aurora R10, which is one of the most powerful gaming machines. Its graphics appear to jump off the screen at you. To intensify this already amazing setup, Marcus had a tri-mount monitor and headset, completing the immersion. I instantly felt inadequate thinking of my repurposed Dell laptop from 2 years ago. Marcus's face beamed with pride when he looked in my direction. He noticed my jaw hanging open, as I admired the beautiful creation sitting in front of us. I've been saving for a few years to put it together. Mom helped with some items, but odd jobs here and there, birthday money, everything I made went into building it. It's amazing, I said, not taking my eyes off it. Here, sit down and log on, Marcus advised, as he stood up and motioned for me to sit. As I sat, the chair enveloped me in memory foam, and it felt as though its designer had molded it for my body alone, and I found it was more comfortable than even my bed. As the game loaded, I felt a vibration run through my back, and jumped a bit at the sensation. It's a gaming chair that reacts to the game, and vibrates to improve the experience. Quickly, Marcus began running through all the minute details of the machine. You'll never want to play the old way after playing with this setup. Looking back at the screen, I felt as though it had sucked me into a distant world, and I was only on the login screen. With there being 3 monitors, my peripheral vision was now fully engaged. The once dull-appearing graphics I was used to seeing on my laptop roared to life, with brilliant colors and shapes surrounding me. Don't forget the headset, Marcus said. From the small stand in front of the center monitor, I picked up the black headset and placed them over my ears. Marcus pressed a button on the keyboard, and it filled my ears with the fantastic noises of the game, and subtle background ambience details that had not been obvious to my computer. As I felt myself being pulled into the game, a tap on my shoulder brought me back to reality. They're noise-canceling headphones, Marcus said. Great when no one is in the room or if you're trying to ignore someone. Not so great when you have someone with you. Wow, I didn't even hear you. Log on and let's see where you are. We can form a cohort. As I moved the mouse to start my log-on sequence, something twinkled outside of the window. Lifting my head to see where the beam of light had come from, my pulse picked up, realizing that it was Izzy and Carolina returning. I watched mesmerized as she made her way down her driveway toward their mailbox. After rummaging through it and taking the few parcels from inside, she started her way back up toward her house. I'd not realized how transfixed I was with her every movement, until I heard Marcus snort behind me. Turning, I looked at him. He was grinning as he looked back and forth from Izzy to me. You know she can see you, right? Wait, what? What are you talking about? Ice swam rapidly into my belly, and my mouth went dry. Well, I can see you staring at her out of your window. Obviously, she can see you doing the same thing. I felt a rush of emotions. It was as though a tidal wave of hot and cold had erupted together, and were fighting for dominance in my abdomen. I don't... Bro, you so do. Your current approach is super creepy, though. Perhaps, and kind of thinking out loud here, you should, I don't know, talk to her? Marcus continued with his teasing, making a sarcastically shocked face as he spoke. As I watched his theatrics and realized the significance of what he was saying, I felt all the heat in my body coalesce around my head. Marcus must have seen it and smiled, but continued with a fresh approach. Look, Izzy and I have known each other since we were in kindergarten. We moved on the street roughly around the same time, too, about 5 years ago. Although we're not as close as we used to be, I'm sure I can act as your go-between. Still reeling from his revelation, I found it difficult to form words, so I sat there and stared blankly at him. I mean, I do enjoy watching it from over here, so it's totally cool if you want to continue at your own creeper pace. Feeling my senses wake up again, I said, No, that would be great. A proper introduction, I mean. Marcus looked up at Izzy's house and then back to me with a wry smile. You know she plays Castle Core too, right? You logged on yet? Marcus asked. Not yet. Good, let me log on. I'll find you and then I'll summon Izzy. I can try to join us all together in a cohort. Realizing the amazing offer he had just presented, I immediately got out of the chair to allow Marcus access to the computer. With a few quick motions, Marcus logged on and was searching for our avatars. Once you enter the game, it brings you to Elemental Plaza, an opening scene that acts as a staging point. In this area, a player can purchase any items they may need for the journey, meet other players, form cohorts, or create challenges. The larger your cohort and the more challenges you win, the higher you rank. I always felt that they got their inspiration for the plaza from Disney World, as it had the feel of Main Street USA, with branch-off points at the end of the road leading to the different lands. Since everyone always started here, it was also the easiest location to meet other players. What's your name in the game? Lucaraya 321. Marcus stopped and turned to look at me, an eyebrow raised. Where did you come up with that? I hesitated a moment, considering giving the significance of the name. If I could talk to my 11-year-old self, I would talk him out of the combination, as I hated explaining its significance now. Lucaraya was my dad. He died when I was 3. I lost both parents, and it left me as one. Marcus's eyes grew wide. He showed the typical telltale signs people do when not knowing what to say. Seeing his uneasiness, I tried to allay his concerns and remove the awkwardness that had stemmed from the name, like it always did. It's been 12 years since they passed, and I don't really remember them that well. Some memories are stronger than others, but it's more like feelings, sounds, and smells that I remember instead of solid situations. I seriously wish I could rethink the name, but you can't change it without starting over. Marcus watched but did not answer. Feeling the awkwardness mounting, I did what I always did in those situations and kept talking. For instance, I remember my mother's smile and her perfume. Sometimes I smell it and find myself drawn to it, hoping that I'll come across her. It's the same with my dad. I recall his laugh, and I can vividly remember him swinging me around in our old living room. Marcus just stood there, and I could feel my cheeks flush brighter. Realizing that I needed to change the topic quickly, I blurted out, "I'm not upset over it, so you shouldn't be. It's why I rarely talk about it." Seeing Marcus visibly relax a bit, I looked toward the screen and noticed his screen name, Enos12605. "Your birthday, I presume?" After a brief pause, he answered, "That would be correct. Apparently Enos was a popular name." "So, are you a January baby or a December baby?" I asked. Perplexed, he looked at the name and realized how it might be confusing. "January 26th, he amended. "Where did you come up with Enos, though?" The corners of Marcus's lips rose. "He's the god of judgment. It felt appropriate at the time." Not sure how to answer, I nodded in approval and watched as he summoned my avatar. After Lucaria 321 was visible on screen, he did the same for Izzy. "Ilaria 424, is that Izzy?" Marcus nodded. "She's a tree nymph. Not much help in battle, but she comes in handy before and after. She's able to help you gain supplies and heal faster, too." "April 24th? Is that her birthday?" "Yeah, I guess we're all original in our thinking." I chuckled to myself as Marcus sent the summons. After, he sat back in his chair and looked out the window. He must have sensed me staring at him. Without looking at me, he pointed out the window towards Izzy's house. "Her room is over there. It's the front room on the second floor. Once she realizes I'm calling her, she usually comes to the window to wave. At least, she used to." Instinctively, I stepped out of view of the window. Marcus turned to look at me. "Honestly, aren't we trying to break that habit?" Realizing the idiocy of the move, I crept back to the spot and watched the window Marcus had pointed out. Although it seemed to take an eternity, the curtains finally moved, and the frame of a waving girl was visible. "Sweet! She saw us!" Within a few minutes, a new creature materialized on the screen. When you summon a player to an area, they appear on the screen, like Mr. Scotty beaming them to your location. As the flickers of light dissipated around her avatar, I could see that her character looked more elfish. She wore dark leather pants with a red sleeveless shirt, which also appeared to be leather, and a patchwork of material that buttoned up and was form-fitting. Over her shoulder rested a bow, while a green leather pouch hung at her waist. Her hair was long and dark with small braids framing her face at the front, and tied in a plait down her back. Marcus moved to the text box next to her name and began typing, but a text bubble popped up before he could finish. I could feel my pulse reach a near staccato pace as we stood transfixed looking at the computer. Marcus swiveled in his chair and looked at me. "Are you coming, or are you just going to stand there?" Realizing that I'd slowly been backing away from the computer since the message bubble appeared, I inched back in his direction. I don't know what to say to her. She messaged me, not you, remember?" "Oh, yeah, of course. Well then, what are you gonna say to her?" "I'm honestly not sure. I haven't talked to her in almost 3 years." I swung my head in his direction and glared at him. "Are you serious?" Marcus chuckled. "Huh, no. I spoke to her yesterday at school." He then mumbled, "It was 3 years before that, though." "What?" I asked, half exasperated. "Look, just because we live next to each other doesn't mean that we're besties." I felt a rush of heat start in my core and slowly creep toward my head. "You kinda said that you two knew each other since forever. You could put a good word in for me." Marcus looked contemplative. "I didn't say that. I don't think I said that." "If you didn't, you sure implied it." Frustration mounting, I waved it off and looked at the screen. "What did she say to you?" Watching Marcus move the cursor to the message center was like waiting for the killer to attack the lead character in a horror movie. Before he could click on the message center, the number changed from a blinking red number 1 to a 3. "She's not messaged me a single message in 3 years, let alone 3. I watched Marcus waiting impatiently for him to push the button. "Are you going to admire the number, or are you going to check it?" I asked. I could feel anticipation coloring my voice, and tried to calm myself. But as the seconds ticked on, waiting on the contents of the message was driving me nuts. I think Marcus knew it, and was dragging it out to torture me. As I had thought, he looked up and gave a crooked smile. "Okay, Casanova, I'm checking now." As he clicked on the button, a small window appeared with the avatar of a fairy-like creature in the top left corner and the name Ilaria 424. Without realizing it, I had moved closer to the screen and was analyzing her avatar. He sat back in his seat and watched me. "Would you like to sit?" Realizing that I was slowly pushing into his space at the computer, I backed up and apologized. I looked at Izzy's name and tried to figure where she came up with Ilaria. Marcus must have realized it and explained. "Ilaria means happy, plus she thought it sang when she chose it." I felt a rush of jealousy run through me and stared at Marcus in disbelief. "You helped her set up her account?" "Yeah, we created the account like 3 years ago. She was over here all the time, and then she wasn't." I felt a sense of guilt as I watched the change in his demeanor. "What happened?" "I'm not sure, but I suspect her sister's popularity played a huge part. My mom is not poor, but I don't come from money. I'm not sure if you noticed. I'm not exactly easy on the eyes either. Doesn't really help with the whole cool vibe they have going." Marcus seemed to drift off in his thoughts. Although I'd only known him for a short period, I was confident that he was a great friend, and hoped that his theory about Izzy's sisters was wrong. Remembering my morning with the trio left me now with more questions than answers, and I wanted to ask him to fill in the missing blanks for me. Unfortunately, I wasn't sure that he would have any more information to give. Besides, asking seemed like it would be dropping acid on an already open wound. Unsure what else to say, I tried to remain stoic for him while he worked through his emotions. "Your uncle is some fancy doctor, right?" he finally asked me. "He's a doctor. I don't know about the fancy part." "You stood a better chance with her than I could, at least through her sister's eyes." "Why do you say I stood a better chance?" "You're a creeper." Marcus said it so matter-of-factly I wasn't sure if I heard him correctly. "Thanks," I grumbled and looked back at the computer. "You can fix it, I think. Either way, let's see what she said." "Hey, Marcus, it's been a long time since we joined forces in here. Need help with a combination lock? Or are you about to embark on a battle that you need backup on?" Feeling a twinge of jealousy, I looked quizzically at Marcus. "A combination lock?" He quickly retorted. "Whoever made those needs to be beaten. They're impossible to open." He calmed a bit after realizing how crazy he sounded. "I may have needed her help to open my locker more than once yesterday." Seeing his reaction and imagining him struggling, I had to fight back a laugh. Marcus looked indignantly at me, then must have realized how ridiculous he appeared and smiled too. "Be grateful you don't have to deal with those things. They're seriously evil." Another chime from the computer brought us back to the task at hand. "What did she say?" I asked. Marcus spun in the chair and stared at me. "Although I am a god in the game, unfortunately I lack omniscient powers in actual life. Now if you'd like, I will check." I couldn't help but smile and motioned for him to continue. Spinning back to the computer, he clicked on the window, which read, "Are you there?" Marcus gave me a twisted smile, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What are you about to do?" My voice rose as the fear mounted. "Nothing, just gonna answer her." Marcus's smile was growing wider by the second. "Marcus, what are you about to say?" Marcus quickly stood, causing his chair to fly backward, and threw his body in front of mine, blocking my view of what he was typing. Panic began to build, and I briefly contemplated smashing the machine, but quickly thought better of it. Before I could read or stop the message, Marcus had sent it to Izzy. Satisfied, he walked away from the computer to collect his chair, which was now on the other side of the room. After blinking in disbelief at his actions, I turned to the computer to read the secret message. "No combination locks to defeat over here, but I am here with our new neighbor." Marcus pulled his chair back into its place and resumed his position while I read what he wrote. I turned to him to see he was sitting back with his arms crossed and a huge Cheshire smile. "What was that all about?" I asked. "Watching you squirm was all the motivation I needed. It was worth every moment. Did I make you nervous?" I contemplated if I wanted to laugh or punch him, but was distracted by a small bubble with green dots forming in the chat window. We watched in anticipation as it disappeared, only to return and then disappear again just as quickly. I looked at Marcus and then nudged him in his chair. "Well, I wasn't nervous, but now I'm not so sure," I croaked. Marcus shoved me back and was about to respond when the telltale chime sounded again. We both looked back at the computer. "Hi, Chase. What are you guys doing over there? I hope you're still coming over. The party is about to start." As I read her response, I felt a rush of annoyance run through me. "It's Jace with a J. Actually, she got the entire name wrong. It's Jace." Marcus was just staring at me, one corner of his mouth turned up. "Now that we have the phonetic spelling of your name established, how should I respond?" "I have no idea. You two are the ones who were friends. I'm just the new guy, remember?" I retaliated. Okay, calm down. Marcus started typing as I eagerly looked over his shoulder and tried to regain my composure. JACE came over to tell me of his undying love for you while we killed time before your party. As he was about to hit the enter button, I grabbed his hand. You cannot send that! Why not? Besides sounding like a condescending jerk in it, I'm not professing my love over here. Wow, strong words, Northall. Marcus turned back to read what he wrote and grimaced. Okay, maybe it is a smidge harsh. Let's try it again. Our new neighbor's name is Jace. I got it wrong too. We're just killing time till your party starts. Better? Marcus nodded at the screen. Much. He hit the enter button and we waited. A few minutes later, another chime rang, and we looked back to the computer. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Jace. That's a unique name. Another text bubble started, causing us to stare at the screen. So, what is the mission? I looked at Marcus and could see the look of mischief written all over his face. I don't know what you're thinking of doing or saying, but don't do it. Marcus's smile widened. What? She wants to know our mission. As he typed, I jumped at him. We started wrestling for the mouse and keyboard, and all the while Marcus was laughing. She just wants to know the mission. We were still grappling for control of the computer when there was a knock on the front door. Both of us froze and turned to look in its direction. Does your mom have any other impromptu guests she's expecting? Marcus shrugged. Hell if I know. I just live here. We listened as Mrs. Hunter walked from the kitchen past the room and opened the front door. Izzy, what a wonderful surprise. What brings you by? Aren't you needed at your house for the pool party? I let out a noise somewhere between a gasp and a punch in the gut and strained to listen. My heart raced as I tried to surmise what would have brought her here. As the panic began to swell, I felt as though my brain was short-circuiting. Unable to come to a logical conclusion, I stared at Marcus, who appeared just as befuddled as I was. Look, just because I live with two women doesn't mean I understand them, he said. While the two of us were still trying to figure out what motivated Izzy to come to the house, the door opened. A small-framed girl with curly hair was standing there. She was wearing short shorts and a hot pink tankini with a loose-fitting white top over it, which was tied at her waist. I felt my pulse quicken. If I'm not interrupting, she said, as the corner of her mouth lifted. Marcus looked at Izzy, then at me and down at my hand, which was still gripping his shirt. Without warning, he broke out into a deep belly laugh. Not completely understanding the scene in front of her, but finding Marcus's laughter infectious, she giggled along with him. Realizing what he was laughing at, I released his shirt and began laughing too. Mrs. Hunter looked confused as the three of us were now all laughing, our amusement feeding off each other's and refueling it. Finally, when we quieted, she looked at Izzy and said, I'm glad you're here to help keep these two under control. Izzy smiled and then nodded. I'll do my best. As Mrs. Hunter left the room, we all slowly regained composure, as Izzy still stood in the doorway. This explains what was going on. All I could see was the curtains moving back and forth and shapes moving around. I looked from Izzy to the window, and I felt my cheeks flush again. Aw, shucks, you came to save us? Marcus teased. More to find popcorn to watch the show that was unfolding over here. Smiling at Marcus, she then turned to look at me and walked over, extending a hand. Let's start over. I'm Izzy. Smiling, I extended my hand and shook Izzy's, but could not speak again. Marcus was watching us and nudged me in the arm, causing me to shift forward slightly. I turned to stare at him. Marcus stood up and rolled his eyes. He put his arm on my shoulder and looked at Izzy as he said, This is Jace. His friends call him Jace. At least, this one does. Izzy giggled and looked from Marcus back to me. Well, it's very nice to re-meet you, Jace. It's great to see you again. As I spoke, I realized how stupid I sounded, and winced as I felt the heat creep up to my face. Marcus broke into laughter again, and fell backward onto his bed. Best Freudian slip of the century! Izzy lightly kicked him in the shin, which only seemed to encourage his laughter. But just as quickly as his laughter had started, he stopped just as fast, and sat up, furrowing his brows. Wait a tick. What do you mean, re-meet? He asked. My family brought them breakfast this morning, she started. They offered for us to stay and eat with them. Then she turned to me, Marcus nodding as he watched us talk. It must be hard coming to a new neighborhood and not knowing anyone. Where did you move from? She asked, ignoring Marcus. Finally able to find my voice, I considered her question. This time, from Arizona. Izzy's deep green eyes widened, and I realized I had confused her. My uncle's job has us moving frequently. Again, Izzy stood wide-eyed before finally speaking. Your uncle? I realized the common misconception that people have when they see my small family. I didn't really want to start this friendship with her feeling bad for me, so I tried to explain my family tree as quickly and with as little awkward information as possible. I didn't know. I just thought, Izzy said. It happens all the time, and by the time most people realize it, we're moving again. Izzy gasped a little. How frequently do you move? Warmth filled me with her question. Was she nervous I would leave soon? Unsure how to answer, I stared at her for a moment. I was contemplating several suitable responses, but all that came out was, it depends. You're not moving soon, are you? You just got here. I felt a smile cross my face, but before I could answer, Izzy's phone went off. She looked down at it and frowned. Then she said, It's my mom looking for me. The party's starting and she's freaking out. Let's head over before she sends out a search party for me. Chapter 5. Pool Party. As we walked over to Izzy's house, I could hear music playing, and the aroma of burgers and hot dogs wafted through the air. Marcus held his head up, sniffing and sighed. You're in for a treat. Her dad is a magician at the grill. Izzy smiled. Yeah, he's not so good in the actual kitchen, but at a grill, he's a completely different cook. Walking around the side of the house, I saw the fireplace and Shay with the Edison bulbs hanging above it, and realized we were entering through Izzy's little sanctuary. She glanced over at me and then nodded up toward my window. I followed her eyes and reluctantly looked back at her. Is that your room? She asked. I gulped and nodded. Marcus broke out laughing and grabbed my shoulders before walking past us and into the pool area. Told you she could see you. I froze in place, causing Izzy to turn and look at me, her mouth turned down. You coming? She asked. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just stared at her. Seeing my embarrassment, she walked over and whispered in my ear. I only started coming out here yesterday, smiling as she turned and walked to the backyard. I felt the corner of my mouth lift as I watched her walk away, and after taking a deep breath, I followed her. Turning the corner, I saw Kyle at the grill, who enthusiastically welcomed me.
Hey, there he is. Burger or dog, Jace?
One of each, I answered more as a question than as a solid statement.
Now that's what I like to hear. Carolina, let's get this boy fed.
Near the house, Carolina had a large table set up with an assortment of barbecue food. The dishes on it ranged from burgers, fries, sliced steak, shish kebabs to potato and macaroni salad. As I began filling my plate, I heard my aunt and uncle coming around the side of the house. As they came into view, I could see Uncle Roman was carrying about 4 trays, and I shook my head. Carolina followed my gaze to where they were standing. Oh, Cora, that's too much. This is a get-together for you, she exclaimed.
My wife cannot keep herself contained to one item, especially with desserts.
Uncle Roman had answered for her. Carolina chuckled as she walked over to meet them. What did you bring? She said as she looked over the packages. Brownies, apple pie, key lime pie, and churros. Carolina's eyes went wide as she looked at Aunt Cora in disbelief. You seriously made all this since we were last there? I had the ingredients in the house, and now I have a double oven. It wasn't a bother, really. Still in shock, Carolina motioned them to the table, where all the food had been laid out. Uncle Roman placed the trays in their designated slots, and then looked back over the assortment. He began rubbing his hands thoughtfully. Shaking my head, I handed him a plate and a napkin before taking my food over to a table, where Marcus and Izzy were sitting. As I sat down, Izzy scanned the table and jumped up, rushing to a cooler before hollering back. What flavor pop you want? Pop, as in ice pop? I asked. She laughed. No, soda. Oh, Coke, I guess? Marcus, what do you want? Coke too, please. Grabbing 3 Cokes, she returned to the table and sat between Marcus and me. Before I could take a bite out of the hot dog, there was a loud ruckus coming from the side of the house. Without warning, Zoe squealed in an octave that could have shattered glass, bounced out of her seat and went running.
Brian, welcome back. Zoe should tackle you any second now, Kyle teased.
As though on cue, Zoe jumped at a very tall and muscular teen in a dark blue swimsuit and a gray t-shirt that appeared to be one size too small, just so it would accentuate his biceps. Behind him were 2 other guys. While each was muscular, they did not match Brian's size. Although he was not loud or overbearing, Brian's presence was immediately known, and everyone seemed to be drawn to him like a beacon of true north. It was fascinating to watch, and a bit awe-inspiring. While watching the 3 teens enter, I heard Marcus sigh heavily and turned to look at him. What? He brought Ethan Campbell. He's a bit of a jerk and thoroughly enjoys torturing me. It's almost a sport for him. You'll be next on his hit list. He enjoys fresh blood." Izzy was listening to Marcus and shook her head. "Yeah, he is a bit much at times, but he's one of the most popular guys at school, and he's Brian's best friend, so he's here." "I'm assuming Brian is Zoe's boyfriend?" I asked, hoping it did not seem like a stupid question. Looking back, Zoe was all over him, and it surprised me that Kyle didn't seem bothered by it. Unintentionally, I scrunched my face up as I watched the encounter. "Tell us how you really feel, Jace," Marcus teased. I turned to look at him, unsure of what he meant. "That face. I guess you're not so into PDAs?" "What is PDAs?" I asked. Izzy sighed as she pointed to her sister and Brian. "That. Public displays of affection. Oh yeah, that doesn't bother me. I was just more shocked by your dad's reaction. Or lack of it. He puts up with it because he thinks Brian has a strong future ahead of him and likes that Zoe is dating him." Izzy's eyes suddenly went wide as she looked in the group's direction. She dropped her head and mumbled, "Great, she's bringing them over." Marcus shifted uncomfortably and seemed to look for an escape route when a voice behind me spoke. "So, this is the new kid on the block, huh?" I turned to see Brian standing behind me and had to strain my neck to see all of him. Up close, he was even bigger and could almost double as a barn door. I stood up and extended a hand to him. He took it and said, "Brian Mitchell. These are my friends Mike Townsend and Ethan Campbell." As I turned to Ethan, I saw him staring at Izzy. Out of the corner of my eye, I also saw her turning away from him. I returned my focus to Brian and said, "My name is Jace Northall." "So, Jace, when'd you move in?" Brian asked. "Yesterday, actually," I answered. "Seriously? You're at a party already? Nice." He patted me on the back and gave me a toothy grin. Zoe approached us with a plate of food for him and snuggled up under Brian's arm. He took the food in one hand and warmly pulled her close to him. Looking down on her adoringly, he said, "Thanks, babe." "Gotta keep you fed," she teased. He leaned down and gave her a quick kiss on the top of her head. Then he turned to the assortment of food on his plate. "So, what manner of deliciousness did your dad cook today?" Brian asked. Zoe giggled like a schoolgirl, which was a much different attitude than I had seen her display earlier today. "You know him, all the usual suspects," she cooed. Distracted by Zoe's theatrics, I nearly missed Ethan maneuvering around the group to kneel beside Izzy. "Hey girl, you're looking amazing today. Want to go for a swim?" I felt my blood boil as I watched him trying to be all charismatic with her. The only thing holding the reins of my temper was the cold shoulder she was obviously giving him. "I think I want to eat first, but if you want to go, the pool's right there. I'll be in later," she said. Marcus dropped his head, trying to hide the smile that was forming at her response. Ethan shot a glare at him, narrowing his eyes slightly. Standing up, he looked back toward Kyle. "Mr. Lewis, do you still have the volleyball net?" he asked.
"Yes, we do. It's in the shed on the other side of the house. You'll have to set it up, though."
"Not a problem." Ethan then turned to look at Marcus with a menacing grin. "Hey, Hunter, how about you give me a hand getting the net out?" Marcus slightly choked on the piece of burger he ate. "As amazing as that offer sounds, and it really does, I think I'm going to sit the game out, so I'm just going to stay here." Ethan stood up and walked over to stand behind his chair, and put his hands on Marcus's shoulders and started massaging. "Come on, Hunter, you can even be on my team." Marcus was visibly uncomfortable with the contact, and shifted with each squeeze of his shoulders. Izzy seemed upset as well, although Mike was giggling behind me. Watching the encounter, I wasn't sure if Ethan was always like this to him, or if he was just being exceptionally passive-aggressive today. Regardless, I decided I was going to put an end to it. "I'll go with you," I said. Marcus's head shot up to look at me, shaking his head slightly and his eyes wide. Ethan slowly looked up, and the corner of his lip lifted. "Great, let's go get it," Ethan said. He turned to walk toward the screen door leading to the other side of the house. Marcus became more visible in his earnestness that I did not follow Ethan. I shifted my head and cocked an eyebrow at him while moving my hands in a slow-down motion. I looked toward the screen door and saw Ethan standing there with an almost genuine smile on his face. Instantly, I started reevaluating my decision to go with him. Realizing my options were now limited, I made my way toward the door. As I passed Ethan, he looked up at me and said, "Damn, you're tall." I half smiled. That's what I hear. Laughing, he placed his arm on my back and nudged me forward with more force than necessary. "It's around the corner. You'd think that someone like Kyle would keep things organized, but that shed is a mess and dark. You need to be careful that you don't get hurt getting stuff out of it. I narrowed my eyes at him, trying to determine whether he was giving me information or a genuine threat. Standing in front of the shed, he pulled the doors open. I could see that he was telling the truth about how imposing it was. Tools, pool supplies, equipment, chemicals, tiki torches, and every other thing had just thrown in there. It showed a complete disregard for the safe extraction of anything at a later date. I grabbed the back of my neck and rubbed it, unsure what I was looking for, or even where we would find it, when Ethan said, "I think it's over there in the back." He pointed in the farthest corner that appeared to have some netting visible. In front of it, though, was an obstacle course of death. Tiki torches were lying all around with their pointy edges sticking out in every direction. It looked like they were waiting to impale the first unfortunate soul that entered this death trap of a shed. Is he serious about this? How many of these things does one person need? I asked. Yeah, he keeps the rest of the house organized, but I think he just gave up on this. You're tall enough. You could probably just reach in and grab it. I turned to look at him, and then back into the mess. I was trying to gauge where I'd find the best footing to get in and out in one piece. Shifting back and forth, I surveyed the surrounding debris. Then I tried to determine what I would need to move to free the net in the back. Carefully, I positioned myself and took a step into the shed, praying that my sandals would stay on my feet. As I looked down at my foot, I felt a shiver run up my back. Instinctively, I shifted my body weight to the right and turned just in time to watch Ethan sail past me into the mess. His arrival caused chairs to upend, buckets to flip, and a horde of tiki torches to roll down onto him. I stood there stunned, trying to figure out how he wound up flailing on the floor. Still in shock, I barely registered the sound of approaching footsteps coming up from behind me. Turning, I saw Brian, Mike, Marcus, Izzy, and Zoe coming closer and looking into the shed. "Wow, taken out by the new kid, huh?" Mike teased. Still stunned, I stared back into the shed. Coming back to my senses, I reached out my hand to help Ethan up, only to have him slap it aside. "Like I need your help!" he screeched. "From the looks of it, you do," I answered. The crowd of teens broke out into laughter, which only seemed to anger him more. He continued to thrash about like a fish out of water. Realizing he was not going to accept my help, I stepped out of the way to allow his friends to pull him out of the debris. Just as they had finished heaving him out, Kyle turned the corner and frowned. "You guys all right over here?" "Dad, this thing is going to kill someone one of these days," Zoe exclaimed. Walking through the crowd, his kiss-the-cook apron shifting as he walked, Kyle looked at Ethan, now covered in dirt and debris. Then he peeked into the shed and grimaced. "You okay, son?" he asked. "I'm fine, sir. Just tripped is all." Kyle nodded and then turned to me. "How about you?" "I'm fine, sir. Ethan's the one that fell in." A rumble of low laughter filtered across the group as Ethan's face turned various shades of red. Kyle patted him on the shoulder and said, "I've got a change of clothes you can use. You won't be able to go swimming in that." Ethan looked down and must have realized how disheveled he now appeared. Kyle pulled a cobweb off his hair and crinkled his face as he tossed it to the side. "Perhaps a quick shower, too?" "Thank you," he answered as he followed Kyle back toward the house. Brian turned to look at me. "Fancy footwork, kid. Not sure how he ended up in there and not you, but I needed that laugh. Few people get the better of Ethan. But a word of warning, I'd recommend watching your back from here on out." "What does that mean?" I asked incredulously. "He's a bit of a sore loser," Mike answered. "Oh, great," I said with a long sigh. I looked back into the shed. The girls were now standing in front of it, examining the contents. "Unless we pull half of this out, I can't see us getting to that net," Izzy said. Brian looked from Mike to me and nodded. "We can get it. I'm itching for a game now anyway," he said. Slowly we began pulling items out of the shed and lining them up along the side of it, and in short order we had successfully reached the net. In the corner just below where it lay, I saw a ball. I picked it up and tossed it back to Izzy, who was helping with moving the items. Once we had pulled the net and the ball out, we placed the items back into the shed in a more organized way, for easier access next time. Izzy took the ball and net to clean the built-up gunk and grime off them. Just as we were finishing and closing the shed door, Ethan turned the corner to see us. "Feel better?" Brian teased. As we walked past, Ethan pretended to punch Brian in the gut. Brian folded over him with an exaggerated groan. I lingered back slightly, wanting to be sure this was not a gift Ethan would hand out to all that passed by him. Fortunately, he seemed only fixate on Brian, and wrapped his arm over Brian's back as they made their way to the pool area. I let out the breath I had been holding when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It made me jump slightly. When I turned, I saw it had been Izzy. "You okay? I'm glad he fell into the shed and not you," she said. I think that had been his intention. One minute I was gauging the likelihood of my death, and the next he was supermaning past me into the shed. She laughed at my explanation, which left me laughing as well. Come on, let's get you a drink while they set up the net, Izzy suggested. As we turned the corner back into the pool area, Izzy and I were still laughing. Scanning the pool area, I saw Ethan in the pool setting up the net. He was glaring at me through it, flames burning from his gaze. Izzy followed my glance and rolled her eyes. Ugh, testosterone, she sighed dramatically. I looked down at her with an eyebrow lifted in a lopsided grin. Seeing my face, she smiled too. Okay, it infuses some of you with overwhelming surges of it. You, though, you have just enough. I think that's a compliment, I teased. Marcus walked over to us with his back facing the other guys. With his right hand at chest level, he was pointing at his hand and whispering, I am not doing this. Ethan is gonna kill me. I glanced over his shoulder and then back to Marcus. Good news. I think you're safe today. Fairly sure he has my name on his death list now, I said. Izzy cringed slightly and looked at me. Better to meet it head on. Want to go swimming? She teased. Marcus's eyes went wide as he looked at her. Did we not just discuss the mortal danger we're in right now? He asked. Behind Marcus, I saw Brian walking toward us. I nodded in his direction, so Marcus would turn around and spot him too. We're putting together a friendly game. Want in? Brian asked. Depends on your definition of friendly, Marcus muttered under his breath. Not wanting to look like a coward, I nodded before pulling off my t-shirt and flipping my sandals off. It was only at that point that I remembered Izzy was standing next to me, and a sense of self-consciousness washed over me. Trying to be stealthy, I glanced over to her and noticed her looking at me before turning away. Seeing her reaction removed any doubts I had, and I felt a smile grow. You in, Hunter? Brian asked with a smile. He visibly gulped and looked pleadingly at me. Who are the captains? I asked. Ethan and I usually are, but it can be you and Ethan if you prefer, Brian answered. I looked at Marcus, who was now continually running his hands through his hair. Ethan and I can be captains. Is it just us kids or are the adults joining? I asked. Marcus seemed to calm as he looked past the pool to the adults that had amassed. He must have realized Ethan would not drown him with that many adults around. I'm not sure. We can ask, Brian said as he turned to them. Hey, any of you guys want to join in? The group looked back and forth to each other before Kyle took his apron off. I can't pass up a competition. How about you, Roman? He asked. Uncle Roman looked at me, asking with his eyes if it was okay. I nodded with a smile. Sounds great. What are the teams? We're about to figure that out now. Jace and Ethan are the captains. As everyone prepped for the game, Zoe brought a coin over from where Alyssa was sitting with the other women. Call it in the air, Jace, she said. As the coin flipped, I said, tails. She caught the coin in her hand and flipped it over the back of her other hand. Then she stood, holding it there to build suspense. Today, Zoe? Izzy said. Fine, she said. When she lifted her hand, we looked down to see tails. I felt a rush of relief. Looking back over the faces, I tried to determine my best course of action. Your pick, Northall, Ethan said. I scanned the group again and focused on Marcus, who was standing next to Brian. Again, he had his hand up at waist level and was pointing to Brian vigorously. Next to Brian, I saw Izzy and knew that if I didn't pick her first, Ethan would. Then again, if I didn't pick Brian first, Ethan would nab him. Crap, which one, I thought. We're not picking March Madness brackets, Jace, Kyle added. Right, I'll take Brian. Izzy's face dropped slightly, and I instantly felt that I had made a mistake. The corner of Ethan's lip went up. I'll take Izzy. Damn, I knew he was going to do that, I thought. I scanned the group again. Kyle, I said. Mike, Ethan countered. Marcus. Zoe. Uncle Roman. Alyssa. As the teams dispersed, Uncle Roman walked over to me and nudged me a little. I was getting nervous you were going to forget about me. Sorry, I'm trying to play a balancing act, and I think I'm failing at it right now. He looked at the pool to Izzy and then back to me. I think she'll forgive you. I was about to say something when he raised his eyebrows at me. I instantly closed my mouth and smiled at him. We all jumped into the pool, assuming our respective sides. Brian motioned for us all to gather in the center. Then he looked at me. You okay with me giving a play? He asked. You know them better, so I'm all ears, I answered. Ethan cannot block a spike, especially mine. Plus, he can't help himself from trying, so every chance you get, bump it to me. Izzy and Zoe both play volleyball, so be on your A game with them.
They'll take your head off and not think twice about it, Kyle added.
Great, Marcus muttered. Don't go easy on them either, Brian said, looking at Kyle. He laughed.
They would never let me live it down.
Then we're all in agreement, Brian said. As we turned, the other side had already assumed their positions and were waiting for us. Scrambling, we each took a corner, leaving Kyle in the middle. Along the net, Brian had positioned himself opposite Mike and slowly began taunting him. Izzy sat in the server's spot. Holding the ball, she bounced gracefully in the water before she tossed it high. Izzy jumped up in the water to send the ball sailing at me like a missile. Although I had been warned, her speed took me by surprise. All I could do was put my hands up to block it. The ball collided with my knuckles and went flying out of the pool toward the women that were sitting. I heard wails of screams as the ball smashed off the middle of the table, sending food everywhere. On the other side of the net, Ethan laughed as he pulled himself out of the pool. He then walked over and tried to help with the mess. Kyle looked back at me.
I warned you. At least you got your paws up. Otherwise, that might have gotten your nose.
Uncle Roman swam over to me, a grimace on his face.
Okay, maybe she's a little irritated with you.
He held his fingers close together to show how little. You think? The ball was tossed back to Izzy by Carolina, who said, Iha, let's try not to kill our guests today, huh? This isn't a championship game, okay? Yes, Mom. She turned and assumed a similar position. Great, she's aiming at me again, I thought. As she tossed the ball, I steadied myself, anticipating its trajectory. She hit it with slightly less force, but directed it at me again. Incoming! Marcus bellowed. I waited until the ball was near before I jumped up. I bumped the ball high in the air but toward Brian, who was at the ready. Seeing the trajectory, he smiled and prepped for his death spike on Ethan. Brian slunk down in the water and jumped up as the ball approached the net. He slapped it down with his giant fist of a hand. Ethan dived for the ball, but missed, creating a large splash in Izzy's direction. As the water dissipated around her, she splashed violently in response in Ethan's direction. I'm sorry, I thought I had it, he answered. You were nowhere near it. Mike shook his head. The ball was tossed back to me, and I scanned the water for my target. Although I intended to hit it toward Mike, I looked intently at Izzy. Seeing me focus on her, Izzy set herself to receive the hit, and Ethan looked from me to her. I tossed the ball into the air and hit it, turning at the last second toward my actual target, but it careened over the net toward Ethan, who had not been looking, and the ball slapped loudly off the side of his face and back into the water.
Son, it's always best to keep your eye on the ball, particularly when it's being served, Kyle said, chuckling.
Ethan grabbed onto the side of his face and refused to move his hand. I didn't think he was going to hit it to me, he retorted, still grasping his face.
I think that was the point, Uncle Roman answered.
Kyle looked back to Uncle Roman.
I think this is a bit too much game for me. Want another beer?
Uncle Roman eyed me, confirming that I was okay with his departure. When I nodded, he said,
Sounds good,
and followed Kyle. Brian looked at the teams. 3 against 5. Someone needs to come over here. I think it's safe for all of us, particularly Jace, if Izzy is on this side of the net. Before Ethan could answer, Izzy swam over to our side, positioning herself in front of me along the net. I looked over to Uncle Roman, who grinned and lifted his beer toward me. On the other side of the net, Ethan had let go of his face. An almost opalescent ring of red was quickly forming there. Brian pointed to his face, and then said to Ethan, You have something?
Just there.
Mike turned to look and broke out laughing, Brian laughing as well. You branded him, Mike said, swimming toward Ethan. Right up close to him, Mike went hysterical, laughing hard enough that he splashed everyone around as he fell back into the water. You can actually see the Aquasport logo, he choked out. I felt heat infuse in my face as I swam over to Ethan. Man, I'm really sorry. Ethan glared at me, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Brian swam up behind him and patted him on the back. Come on, man, let's get you some ice. Everyone but Izzy, Marcus, and I left the pool. Maybe we should take down the net, I suggested. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea, Izzy said. Just as we finished, Zoe came back out onto the deck. She whispered something to her father, who stood up and walked into the house with her. Izzy saw it as well and looked at me. What do you think that was about? I asked. I have no idea, but I think it's better that we just stay out here, she answered. A few moments later, Kyle came out of the house and sat down. I heard Carolina ask what was going on.
The boys wanted to go get some ice cream, and the girls asked if they could go.
Carolina examined Kyle's face for a while, and then nodded before returning to her conversation with the others at the table. Izzy looked back at Marcus and me. Want to go for a walk?
Sure.
Yeah, sounds like fun, said Marcus. We all toweled off and then put our clothes back on. Mom, we're gonna go for a walk, okay? Izzy asked. Carolina looked at the three of us and nodded. Don't go too far, okay? We won't, Izzy answered. We walked around the side of the house and toward the street when Marcus made a shivering motion. On second thought, I think I'm gonna pop home and take a shower, he said. Izzy's cheeks flushed as she looked from Marcus back to me. As he walked back to the house, we made our way down the street. I turned back to see Marcus, who was smiling and giving me a double thumbs up.